Welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. I have with me back on the show Arjun Paliwal, voted the #1 Australia's best buyer's agent. Today we're talking about what property data actually matters. We're in a world of it where there seems to be no shortage of what property data is important, what isn't, and I like to think of you, Arjun, as the self-confessed property data nerd, as you've named your podcast, the king of property data. So welcome back to the show, and I want to dive in straight away just to get your understanding of what property data actually matters.
Yeah, so my points that actually matter, it depends on which day you ask me because there's so many trends that I like, but I think nothing is more powerful than economic and supply analysis, because growth tends to almost always exist when there's nothing for sale, nothing for rent, no construction, and a lot of jobs. I haven't seen an environment where those four things are there and growth is not happening. And so due to that, I simplify it and I bring it down to those four things. Is there a lot of job advertisements, infrastructure spend per capita? Mm-hmm. Is there low supply for sale, low supply for rent, low supply for construction?
Okay, so they're your top. That's what you would say is your top four. Economic, interesting. Let's quickly touch on that because there's often, I see all the time, there's economic spend, governments, councils that's promised, and then there's actually the spend that ends up happening and turns into what has been promised. Like look at Badgerys Creek Airport, for example, was gonna happen for 10 years. Now it has finally happened. How do you sort of go through and pull out of the data or find economically what's going to happen, what's solidified, and what may just be a couple politicians throwing around some promises coming around election time and getting everyone's hopes up?
Yeah, the actual versus what is proposed is a really key point. I think firstly, we don't like to isolate economic activity as just what's happening, right? I think there's so many key layers to it. Is there confidence in the state's finance trends or localized finance trends? Is there job advertisements and what type of jobs? Is there unemployment rate trends moving in a certain direction? Is there all of that combined with the construction pipeline and supply pipeline that's not too crazy? And then you also look at it from infrastructure spend, but types of infrastructure. I use this example commonly. If you have a wind farm, it might take hundreds of people to build it, thousands of people to build it, but it might take 5, 10, 20 people to operate it. And so we have to look at from a perspective of types of infrastructure. And then one thing that's really important is spend per capita. What we do is we look at that spend and go, hey, is this a $1.8 billion hospital, $1.2 billion hospital, plus $500 million pier upfront, improvements, and then the city's only got 50,000 people, or the city has 5 million people, right?
Okay, so are you breaking that down per capita, on a person and population rate?
Yeah, so we're looking at that, how many people are in the area versus how much spending is happening too, and the types of spending, looking at it all holistically. Because everyone thinks of the big billions of dollars that happens in our biggest cities, but mate, they're meant to happen. It's normal.
There's millions of people.
Yeah, there's normal. There hasn't been years where there hasn't been billions happening. So I think the key is to look at it at a greater scale for those bigger cities, and then a pretty okay scale at those smaller cities, and what types of things. So those are core things I look at.
What would be a rate if I'm looking at a smaller city, maybe something regional? Do you have any rates or rules of thumb where if it's hitting this sort of rate per person, per capita, there is significant infrastructure spend? Or do you have any guidance on if someone's looking into, a hotspot that they've marked, maybe they're looking at, say, Wagga Wagga or Tamworth or somewhere like that. They've got an understanding of the infrastructure spend. They've got an understanding of the population. Now, do they need to research all the regional capital cities to get that benchmark? Or do you have sort of like a benchmark that you guys look for at Investorkit that says, yes, that's a good spend per capita? Let's dive into that.
Yeah, because of the thing that throws it off, which is those types of infrastructure, the whole $5 billion farm is not as impactful, in my opinion, than a $600 million hospital upgrade. So that throws it off sometimes. So what we've got to look at it is almost like 3 swim lanes. One is a benchmark, one's an actual dollars, and the third is types. And we highly prioritize certain transport and medical infrastructure and entertainment, because these 3 infrastructure pieces are massive players on dollars that flow in and out, accessibility of a city, and then flow-on impacts and types of jobs created. Everything else is great as well, but these three, transport, recreation/entertainment or social, however anyone wants to call it, and then health, these three have played a bigger part. And then as long as they're not met with huge oversupply of build, then from that perspective, they do leave a positive impact on an area, whether it be a smaller one or a larger one.
What would be an example of a big project that you think would it be the wind farm example of, there's a $50 million or $20 million spend where it wouldn't be as impactful?
Yeah, I think those renewable contracts, I think right now, whilst the world's in this huge craze or transition over and it's so important, it's just like when, you think of the roofer that goes to the insurance company and puts up a bill for 50 grand and does it from mum and dad at 25 grand. That's the kind of stuff I see happening in the renewable. Like they're charging huge amounts. I'm talking like $2 to $5 billion for some projects. And you look at them and go, look, I don't want to overlook at this industry, but surely a few,
I'm not a QS, but come on, guys.
Because they just know what's hot in the government spend. And look, I'm sorry if I'm bashing this this area a little bit, but the main thing is surely you cannot tell me that we're having thousands of workers to build this magnificent world-class hospital at 600 million or 800 million or 1.1 billion, and then all of a sudden we're going to pop up a few poles and charge you $2 to $5 billion. So the main thing is, I think that's kind of a spend where I think it's overhyped, and I don't look at it too massively. I do look at it from how much there is. Is it an energy transition? Like, is it lots of other types of energy transitioning in the city? Is there types of jobs supporting it? Is there other infrastructure around it? So that would be an example of, hey, don't get too excited by the dollars and just start shouting billions everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right. I'm across infrastructure and spending, what it's key to in terms of transport. We're talking health and entertainment. So if you're looking at your hotspot, or you're looking at your particular town or city, and you can see that there's a quite a large spend and pipeline of projects in that particular ballpark, that's a good sign. Moving into next, I believe the next point you mentioned was supply.
Yes.
Something I found interesting, which I learned from you on previous podcasts, is how to calculate that a market is hottening up with days on market and your formula. Are you able to touch on that and anything else that would relate to if someone's looking at a market and wants to find if the supply and all those sorts of metrics are warming up or giving indications of growth?
Yeah, sure thing. So firstly, I look at it as barbecue talk first. And if it can be that simple, then it's likely going to show up on the spreadsheets, right? So I always look at it from a perspective of, if there's not that many houses for sale, rent, or construction, there's a good amount of people buying. As a result, people should therefore be able to sell faster, not have to give as much discounts, and therefore prices go up. And so in summary, if we now turn that to a technical statement, it's higher sales volumes in comparison to listings for sale, a reducing and low level of building approvals in the pipeline, combined with days on market reducing, vendor discounting reducing, low rental vacancy rates, and pull that all together, you start to get that statement or paragraph I just said. And I have never seen a time where someone said to me, the opposite of all those is occurring, and prices are rising. Like, could you imagine that? Going, hey, lots of stuff for sale, no one's buying anything, lots of people building, lots of properties for rent, properties taking longer to sell, properties are giving away discounts left, right, and center. But guess what? Prices are going to go up. Bullcrap.
Show me where.
Show me where. So, yeah.
Okay, so vendor discounting, what's a benchmark for when it's dipping below? Is it 1%? Is it 3%? What's sort of a good benchmark to know that if there's no if vendor discounting is decreasing in and around this amount, then it tells you that it's heating up?
Yeah, I think the people listening to this, if there's one thing they probably want to not do, I started my journey thinking just flat percentages and ticking all these boxes.
Okay.
But then I started realizing the trends work more importantly. So for example, where I learned this was the city of Tamworth. Tamworth was an example where they just list and sell property very differently. And I'll give you an example. When you go to Tamworth, it's not like Sydney, even though it's New South Wales, where you go and put down a contract in the first open home, sign your life away with a lawyer's review on the Friday, get it done Saturday, and on the day on Saturday, you're putting a 0.25% deposit of the purchase price.
Yep.
You're signing a contract to sell, and you're going, mine, all mine, go into cooling off period. That happens in Sydney a lot.
Yeah.
Listing goes up Thursday. Friday, Thursday, lawyers are inundated with reviews. Lawyers are laughing to the bank because there's like 50 reviews for like one place, but only one contract gets exchanged.
Yeah.
And then the contract happens on a Saturday. Buyers, they're already signing a price on the front page and ready to put down their 0.25, show a screenshot, move on.
Mm-hmm.
In Tamworth, you'll have a property go online. And then what will happen is they'll serve what's called a sales advice. And this is a document to say, we're kind of agreeing on the terms. Not fully, though. Still going to show some other people if we want to. And we'll let you have your 2 weeks to go to your pest and building and finance. And if we come back and we agree on any negotiations and stuff, then you pay the deposit and sign a contract unconditionally. Right?
Okay.
So you're waiving off your cooling off. You're waiving off putting a 0.25% down. You're just basically doing it when you're ready. And so as a result, what do you reckon happens to days on market when you start to have these sorts of things? Tamworth looks like a city where everything takes 100 days to sell.
Yeah, okay. Really
Right?
good point.
So I hope that whole city's listening and goes, we should start doing stuff like Sydney, because the days on market trends would pop off and be way quicker. But it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so what did I look at Tamworth as? I looked at its trend change.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2020, naturally, we look at Tamworth's trend change. We're like, oh, something's happening.
Mm-hmm.
2021, something's definitely happening. And now our customers who bought there have gained substantial equity growth, substantial rental growth, and they're feeling pretty good looking back at making that decision. Had we used a clear, flat benchmark, we would have said no to Tamworth every single day of the week.
Okay. So less focus on benchmarks and numbers, more focus on trends.
Yes, because if you went somewhere and said, oh, look, I need to have 30 days on market and below, and agents are capturing data differently across the nation and the way things are moving, then all of a sudden you look at the city with 50, 60, 70, you would have ignored Wagga, you would have ignored parts of Tamworth, you would have ignored parts of Albury as well in some areas when they were doing it, and you would have missed out on 30, 40, 50, 70, and in some cases percentage growth over the last 3 to 5 years. So from that perspective, benchmarks are probably helpful in one universal data set, example, vacancy rates.
Yep.
You can say that, hey, if it's below 2%, it's okay. If it's below 1.5%, it's pretty good. Below 1%, phenomenal. And so those are ones where you have benchmark, but trends are the most important things because trends show change, right? And change is what people will want to see if a location is now worth your time.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. I'm learning a lot too, just talking through that, and you make very valid points. I know you spend, last time I checked or what I picked up, you spend 6 figures a year in your business on research and data and your subscriptions. Obviously, the humble property investor out there doesn't have such a budget, but are you able to point them to a couple of good little places where they can start to pick up and understand this sort of data?
Yeah, sure thing. So firstly, data doesn't need to be that expensive. We pay that much for more confidence. We pay that much for speed. We pay that much for various layers of data and cutting it down in different ways. We pay that much because it's the world we're in. We're in a pay-to-play world. You want the best stuff, you got to pay for it, right? You want the best steak? Yeah, sure. A couple of places might secretly surprise you with a $20 steak or $10 one.
Yep.
But it's probably those highly graded marble rating ones with the gold flakes on top, at salt base, dropping in sprinkles on top. That's probably the ones.
For it.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is that's why. But if investors are out there, a couple of quick sources. ABS should give you your building approvals. SQM Research, free data that they send, should give you your vacancy
rental,
rates,
yields,
listing supply, and yields and asking prices. You go to your suburb profile pages, you should be able to get your demographics on domain and real estate. And then from there, you start looking at those sources together, combined with a bit of visitation or phone calls to property managers. Put in the time, you'll get some results that should be not crazy far off, but it'll just take forever because people will charge you when you want data in bulk. If you want one chart for one city in one region, you pull out a chart from all these places for free. But then you go, I want to benchmark all of these hundreds of suburbs, thousands of suburbs. You've got to start paying for stuff. That's kind of where the downside is in that data world.
Okay, so that's where you're paying for it, is because obviously you guys are looking at all the, you guys monitor, you do a lot of your data on SA3?
Yeah, we do all sorts of cuts.
Yep.
So we'll do, and these are terms by ABS that they give out, and it's just trying to get statistical relevance, right? I'll give you an example. You buy all those subscriptions out there for spotting this or trends that, or might have like some scoring system there.
Yeah.
The problem is those data points are made with bulk sale, subscription sale in mind. And as a result, when you go down to suburbs, the problem is that suburb data is what everyone wants because they want to find the hot suburb. But then you look at the statistical relevance and you look at how many sales in a quarter and you're like, how can you sit here and tell me that you're confident this is the next spot when it just had 5 sales in the last quarter or 20 sales in the last quarter? Like, you're judging all of that based on an area where there's more grass than there is houses. Right. And so from that perspective, like, it's just land everywhere, small areas. And this came up as a score at 93 out of 100 or 80 out of 100 and 50 out of 5 out of 10. And you pull up a chart for the top 10, top 20 areas. A lot of them will be in areas that don't have enough relevance for you to actually make data calls. Yep. And so this is why we cut data in all sorts of ways. We'll look at it from a suburb. We'll look at it from an SA2, which is a neighborhood. Yep. An SA3, a cluster of neighborhoods. An SA4, bigger than council area, but not quite a city area. In some areas, it's a city. And then we're looking at cities, states, country, fundamentals of the housing markets overall for Australia, and we're culling it down, up, and everything. Yep. And if we get enough ticks in an area for enough types of cuts of data, we're confident. But if an area just has an epic suburb or two, go let it be someone else's magic sauce. It's not mine. I'll just move on.
True. And I think you're right, because those reports are made to make money. And at that scale with that data, I'm not sure of their relevance and how useful they actually would be. Are you still using, I think you released it ages ago, was it a 36 or a 38 data point trigger? It was sort of like a graph where you had, if we're trending, I forget what it was called, but if we're trending, over 25 of the 36 growth areas, we're still going to be able to go into that market. I know you're talking about it a lot through COVID, where everyone thought the world was falling apart and all of Australia was going and dropping in 10, 20% in value, whereas you guys went, oh no, actually 30 or 40% or something of the SA3s were actually increasing in value, especially with interest rates and all that kind of stuff lately. So are you still using that as sort of like a framework in and around Investorkit, or? Yeah,
I think the main thing people have to realize in data analysis is one thing I learned very quickly. Every year there is somewhere and something growing. It's just some years it's 2/3 of it, some years it's half the country, some years it's 1/3 of the country, and some years it's 1/4 of the country. But every year something somewhere is growing. That's the first part I recognize, which means, hey, it doesn't matter what year it is, what time of the day it is, what interest rates are doing, what something is doing. There has not been a time where I can say 100% of everything was falling or rising. Even during that COVID boom, there were maybe just under 1/3 of markets that didn't do that great. And they suddenly are some of the markets that are picking up pretty good right now. And so when I say not that great, I say you maybe did 15 to 20% over those years instead of 50 to 100. Right?
Yeah, not great. Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, the key is something somewhere is doing something. But more importantly, we haven't designed our business or research process in a way that just finds the best of everything and we just go to the best. That's wrong. And I'll tell you why. You should have different phases, different markets for different investors. Because what happens is that I've had this chat with a gentleman before. They had like 6 properties or 4 properties in Queensland. And if you were to ask me today, the far north pockets of regional Queensland seem to be at the earliest phase of their cycle. And so if I was to just be the data guy, I would just tell this guy and say, we're going to go here again. But am I really thinking about him, his portfolio, the holistic goals, the taxes he'll pay, and how he's going to diversify his portfolio? No, I'm not. So then we created sub-markets across the country and we gave them different cycle positions. Because once we realized that every market across the nation, almost every 90%, does okay, we started realizing there's different cycle points. There's the early adopter, hasn't done so well, doing well. There's the hotspot, crushing it, get in because you won't have much time in it. And there's the second wind, crushed it already, came off a bit, and probably going for a round 2, but round 2 won't last forever. And so when we clustered this, we actually think of portfolio first area second. That's key.
Wow, that is key, because I don't think the way I hear a lot of other buyer's agents work is that they find like the head dude that's running the buyer's agency will find the area, and then, you know, all his buyer's agents or all his team will be buying in that area, and it kind of feels like it to me, now that you've said that, it feels wrong to be buying the same property in the same location for everyone, because everyone's portfolio is going to be different.
I would make a lot more money if I did that. I'm here to tell you.
Wow.
If I did that, my business would make a lot more money because I have 28 people who could focus in on one area and crush everyone else trying to buy there.
Yeah, imagine.
But we don't do that because John is having a different portfolio to Marius. And so the main thing is, yes, it makes my time to buy longer. Yes, it takes me, you know, more data, more time, more spending, more people on the ground, more across the country, but it is the right thing to do. And that's the thing. And even if I have to respectfully challenge someone when they're like, oh, but I want to go to Townsville in Bundaberg because that's the best area. I'm like, dude, you got 5 properties in Queensland.
Yes.
We got to change this up. I know this other city I'm taking you to has grown a bit, but 20 years later, when you're deep in taxes, tens of thousands of dollars in all direction, you're going to tell me, hey, Arjun, that little bit less growth at the start, but help me long term, appreciate it. And that's where I think I look at my own portfolio. If I had my own portfolio just to buy in the best area all the time, I wouldn't have the 5 states that I'm in, the 17 different properties. I'm across the whole country in different ways. So you know what that gives me? I wake up knowing that every day something in my portfolio somewhere is doing okay. I wake up every year knowing macro country, Australia can do whatever it has to do in property. A new germ could come, a new, economic activity could be there, and interest rates could pump more. But because I'm so spread, something somewhere's going to be okay. If you kept chasing the best data because the buyer's agent said Perth's the best, or Brisbane's the best, or Adelaide's the best, you're just like a stock on their shelf that you need to go and buy for them because they have assets there. And I just don't feel that's the right thing to do. If I want to have a client base that comes back to me 10 years later and goes, mate, we've got a scaled portfolio across multiple states. We never lose a day's sleep, night's sleep, nothing. Our markets, they're going okay. That's going great. That's going phenomenal. And no job industry shakeup, no technology shakeup rips into our wealth because we've only had exposure of this somewhere here. No materials out of the ground came up one year, didn't come up one year. No floods in the sky came one here. Rain from the sky came here one year, didn't come there. Something somewhere is going to be impacted at all times. And something somewhere is going to be growing at all times. So I would much rather tell you, hey, look, yes, I could have got you better growth there, but I'd rather go here just because your portfolio needs that. That's
huge. I want to end on that point because I think that's probably one of the, apart from the data and the research you guys do, that is a massive point that Investorkit's different compared to other buyers agencies, that they consider, and you are considering, portfolios first rather than location. And I think about that logically, and I think, how on earth can a buyer's agent or someone selling be going to the same location and buying for everyone when the 10 people they're buying for have completely different lives, completely different portfolios, and probably need a different piece of the puzzle for everything? It doesn't make sense, you know?
Yeah, that's key, right? I mean, I can take myself back to 2021. I bought a property for myself in Adelaide. I've been buying properties in Adelaide for clients since 2019, even 2018 late, I think. So what that means is that if I was really all about the best location for the best money, I would have bought for myself back then. But my portfolio was already making different moves in different areas. So even though Adelaide had done pretty well in 2021, and I'd then gone and purchased myself after it done well, it still did well afterwards. Don't get me wrong, 2022 grew double digits when the whole country slipped backwards. But I didn't get there at the start. But my portfolio needed something in SA. And so I made that move for myself, knowing that once my portfolio got to a scale, it didn't matter getting that little bit of growth at the start and being like this hero that looks in the mirror and goes, I picked that market first. I did pick it first for others, but for my own portfolio, I had other moves going on. And then I came back to that city and I still felt the long-term prospects were good for that city. I missed out on 15, 20%, 30%. I still gained another 10% afterwards. And if my portfolio map involves me buying X properties, holding for X years, then having X debt to equal X income, where in that formula did I need to be first to do this and do that? That formula didn't exist. I just know I need to buy certain type of properties in certain markets, be diverse across the country, because everything will return back to its averages. So even when you get something special, it will fade off eventually. It can't keep going forever. So I realized that I've already got some stuff that's going special, and I realized that sometimes I just need to make a move because I need to make a move. It's not about being, Adelaide's done a bit well, better not go there. There are people who just don't understand data enough to realize that cities can keep going. They don't just pop off. I remember Facebook communities where people were saying Hobart had done its thing. Tassie had done its thing from 2017 to 2022. How sick does that make you feel to be wrong 5 years in a row? Like, imagine wake up every day of your life and you're like, going to go respond to some comments and be wrong every day, every year for 5 years in a row, saying something's had its time.
Oh, just a warning for everyone that listens to this podcast. Facebook groups and communities, even property chat, just buyer beware in those groups with the self-proclaimed experts that think they know what they're talking about. Like, I see, I'm tailored towards the development space, and the stuff I see in those groups, even in the property space groups, I just shake my head. Sometimes I'm in them. I'm in them just for the entertainment, but some of those people are really good. I know you're in a couple of groups and stuff. There's a couple of good groups, but there's some people that come into these groups with, I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, is where they get a little bit of knowledge. They think that they're a professional, where really they've just got the iceberg on the top of the water and they have no idea about what's underneath. And it's just...
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, like, if you look at, it's an example of this, right? When you look at data, the two things that people make mistakes on in their communication in these groups is, one is I see it's had its run and it's done. That's one thing I see. Because if you said that in 2019 about Adelaide, you're wrong. If you said that in 2020 about Adelaide, you're wrong. If you said it in 21 in Adelaide, you're wrong. Then interest rates are coming up. And if you said that in 22, you would have been wrong because it grew 10% during 22. It's the best performing capital city. The main thing is, just because it grew, it's not over. Yes, it will have lower chances because it's growing more and more. But if there's no properties for sale, nothing for rent, no construction, lots of jobs, lots of prosperity, people moving in, lifestyle, and it's still relatively affordable, it will keep going until the city's things change in those environments. But once it does change, it probably will cool off for a bit. And I get the sentiment around why you wouldn't want to go there because you're halfway through. But if you look around the country and you realize that almost 80% of the country boomed over the last 3 years, does that mean suddenly that you're not going to buy any property just because 80%'s boomed and it's had its time? So that's the thing you should stop. And the second one is those who go, yeah, we were back there in 2019, we're buying, but we're not there anymore. Like, what do you mean you're not there anymore? Like, I get that different areas have different markets. But if you're not there anymore, are you suddenly saying that it's a bad market? Yes, we change areas. I do too. But I mean, I don't sit here to say and proclaim that I'm not there anymore and I was there. At the end of the day, I can just talk about an area when it went well. But the idea is to say that, hey, there are constantly going to be other areas doing well, but don't make that something to shout out in a group every time. And I think that's the two areas where in groups people can get lost at. Like, they hear people say it's had its time, then they say we're not here anymore, and they suddenly think these areas are bad areas. When the truth is, you cannot just keep going to an area for a portfolio if you want something scalable that you think is just the best one every time. Because you might be too into an area then in your states, your taxes, your diversity. It just doesn't work out well. And I think people should start with portfolio first, data second.
Perfect. Arjun, I'd like to thank you for your time. I think we'll wrap up there on that very point. Start with your portfolio first and then your location second. What your portfolio needs. If you're thinking of working with an expert and they go straight into selling you something in a particular location, then you need to have a really good think about, do they have what's best in mind for you, or do they have what's best in mind for them? Ideally, you're going to a professional, you're paying really good money, you probably want it tailored to yourself and your own goals. Portfolio first, location second. Arjun, I appreciate you coming on. I took so much value from this episode as well. No doubt we'll be seeing you again on the podcast. Appreciate your time, my friend. And congratulations again for being named the best buyer's agent in Australia.
Thank you so much, man. And I might correct you on one part, buyer's agency. It's not me, it's the team.
Oh, of course. You've got a big team. But you did start it. So the best buyer's agency and the best team in Australia. Congratulations and thanks for your time again.
Thank you, mate.